Every crew chief in the NASCAR garage has pulled Larson's cornering telemetry. Every engineer has studied the onboard replay frame by frame. They all see the same impossible number at the same corner, and not one of them can explain how it happens. Not one of them can copy it. 2 to 3 miles per hour. That is what separates Larson from every other car on identical equipment. Over a full road course race, that gap is the difference between standing on the podium and finishing fourth. And one driver from New Zealand just figured out exactly why. This is the full breakdown of what Shane van Gisbergen saw, what he told reporters, and what it means for every race Larson enters from here. Personally, I think if a technique is not written into the rulebook, it is not cheating. It is just smarter driving. But I know half of you disagree. Drop your take in the comments. And if you want technical truth without the broadcast fluff, hit subscribe. Let us get into it. To understand why that one tire told SVG something nobody else in the garage could read, you need to know what a normal NASCAR corner looks like. Because what Larson is doing does not bend the standard technique. It breaks it. Every driver in the Cup Series field was taught the same 3-step sequence. Brake in a straight line before the turn. Turn in at the apex. Roll onto the throttle on exit. That is the formula. That is what the engineers build the setup around. The cars are identical. The rules enforce it. So when one driver consistently finds speed the others cannot, the question is never about the machine. It is about the hands and feet inside it. On ovals, the banking does half the work for you. Road courses do not give you that help. They demand longer braking zones, tighter entries, and significantly more weight transfer through the chassis. Driver input matters more at COTA or Sonoma than it ever will at Daytona, and the gap between a clean corner and a great one is measured in tenths, not full seconds. Larson has been the fastest qualifier at every road course this season. His entry speed into turn 1 consistently sits above the next closest car by a margin that telemetry flags as anomalous. The broadcast calls it aggression, the analysts call it natural talent. Larson himself has shrugged it off in post-race interviews, saying he simply brakes later than everyone else. And for months, that answer was good enough. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? The man is fast. At COTA earlier this year, the timing screens told the story plainly. Through the S's, through the hairpin at turn 11, through the final complex before the start-finish straight, Larson's minimum corner speed sat above the field average at every single apex. Not by a tenth, by 3, 4, sometimes 5 tenths per corner. Multiply that across 14 turns over 92 laps, and the math stops looking like talent. It starts looking like a pattern, and patterns, in a garage built on parity, make engineers nervous. 2 crew chiefs from separate teams reportedly pulled the same dataset that weekend. Both flagged the same anomaly. Neither could explain it. Except SVG did not accept that answer. And what he noticed had nothing to do with braking later. It had to do with something happening at the rear of the car that no broadcast camera has ever caught. The alleged technique is not a modification. Nothing on the car has been changed. No part has been swapped, no sensor added. No illegal component bolted underneath the chassis. What Larson is reportedly doing happens entirely through pedal input, specifically the rear brake. During the first 0.3 of a second at turn-in, Larson allegedly shifts braking pressure rearward in a way that creates artificial rotation. The car pivots around its rear axle faster than the steering input alone should allow. Think of it like a figure skater pulling their arms in mid-spin. The rotation speeds up without any additional force being applied. Larson's rear brakes are doing the pulling. 3 engineers from 3 different teams reportedly looked at the same telemetry trace within 48 hours of that COTA weekend. All 3 reached the same conclusion independently. The rear brake pressure curve did not match any conventional braking profile they had seen in 5 years of Cup Series data. One of them reportedly told his race engineer that the trace looked like a driver catching a slide on dirt and correcting it with the rear brake. Except Larson was on asphalt, at the apex, and the correction was producing forward speed instead of scrubbing it off. The data made sense only if the rear brakes were being used as a steering tool. That conclusion was uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to be the first person to say it out loud. NASCAR inspects hardware. They check ride height, suspension travel, aerodynamic surfaces, brake components. What they do not inspect is the sequence in which a driver applies pressure to a pedal. The car passes tech. It passes every time, because there is nothing physically wrong with it. The so-called modification lives between Larson's right foot and the brake pedal in a timing window so precise that it exists for less than half a second per corner. Over 90 laps at a road course, that half second repeats roughly 400 times. 400 tiny rotations that add up to 2 or 3 miles per hour at every single apex. That data point alone was enough to raise suspicion, but it was not what made SVG speak publicly. What made him speak was what he saw on the tire. Supercars in Australia and New Zealand are a different discipline. The cars are heavier, the tires degrade faster, and managing rear tire wear is not a strategy option. It is survival. A driver who cannot read what his rear tires are telling him will lose the race by lap 30. SVG spent over a decade in that environment. He learned to look at a tire's surface the way a mechanic reads an engine code. Every scuff mark, every grain of rubber, every discoloration tells a story about what the car did 3 corners ago. At a road course weekend earlier this season, SVG walked the grid after qualifying. He was not looking for Larson's car specifically. He was checking his own tire data against a rival's for setup comparison, but as he passed the number 5 garage, his eyes caught the rear right tire on Larson's car. The wear pattern was wrong. On a normal braking sequence, the rear tire shows a light, even scrub, a directional grain that matches the car's rotation through the corner. Larson's tire showed a lateral smear, a sliding mark that runs perpendicular to the direction of travel. That kind of wear only happens when the rear brakes are being used to steer the car mid-corner. Not slow it, steer it. SVG reportedly crouched beside the tire for nearly 10 seconds. He ran his fingers along the smear. Then he stood, walked 2 stalls down to his own car, and checked his rear right for comparison. His tire showed the expected directional grain. Clean, predictable. He walked back to the number 5 stall, looked again. The lateral mark was deeper than he initially thought. It ran nearly 4 inches across the tread face. That is not a one-corner anomaly. That is a technique being applied corner after corner, lap after lap, session after session. SVG reportedly said nothing at that moment. He went back to his hauler, pulled the onboard footage on his laptop, and watched Larson's entry into turn 11 6 times in a row. SVG reportedly stood there for several seconds. He looked at the tire, then at the onboard footage playing on the garage monitor, then back at the tire. The pattern was consistent. It was not a one-off. It was systematic. Every qualifying run, every practice session, the same lateral smear in the same location. And 3 other drivers who studied the same footage tried to replicate what Larson was doing. All 3 failed. One of them said something afterward that changed the entire conversation. The first driver to try was reportedly a road course specialist on a mid-pack team.